The night was electric, the air thick with anticipation. Inside the Gator Bowl in Jacksonville, Florida, a crowd of 14,000 people, mostly teenage girls, was losing its mind. Elvis Presley, the young singer with the magnetic charm and scandalous hip movements, was on stage, singing his heart out. His voice was raw, his energy infectious. When he finished his last song, he playfully said, "Girls, I'll see you backstage." The crowd erupted. In an instant, the arena turned into chaos. Hundreds of girls, driven by a mix of idol worship and teenage frenzy, stormed the stage. They were screaming, pushing, and shoving, determined to get closer to their idol. Security guards struggled to maintain order, but it was no use. The girls were everywhere, tearing off pieces of Elvis's clothing, trying to grab a piece of the man who had captivated them. Elvis's shoes were ripped off, and his shirt was nearly shredded. It took the combined efforts of the police and the venue's security to finally get him to safety in a locker room, where he could catch his breath and regroup. This scene was just one of many that played out across the South in the spring and summer of 1955. Elvis Presley, the boy from Tupelo, Mississippi, had become a sensation. He was no longer just a local star. He was a national phenomenon. His concerts were packed with fans who were as much in love with his music as they were with his persona. His performances were a mix of raw talent, charismatic stage presence, and a hint of rebellion that resonated deeply with the young and restless. But for Elvis, success came with a price. His parents, Vernon and Gladys, were overjoyed by their son's achievements, but they were also deeply concerned. Vernon's back problems still plagued him, and the family's newfound financial stability was a relief. Elvis was happy to contribute, buying them a new home on Lamar Avenue and a brand new Ford Crown Victoria sedan. He even treated himself to a pink and white Cadillac, a symbol of his ambitions and his working-class roots. Gladys, however, couldn't shake off her worries. She had always been protective of Elvis, and now with his growing fame, she felt him slipping away. Concerts took him out of town several nights a week, and sometimes for days at a time. Despite his daily phone calls, Gladys was terrified of the dangers he faced. Car accidents, crazed fans, and jealous boyfriends were constant threats. She kept scrapbooks of his success, but the pride in her heart was tinged with fear. Dixie, Elvis's girlfriend, shared similar concerns. They had tried to keep their relationship the same, but the changes were inevitable. When Elvis was home, they could still enjoy quiet moments together, going to the movies or listening to music. But when he was on the road, she felt the distance growing. The attention he received from fans, especially the girls, was overwhelming. Elvis's confidence and swagger had grown, and sometimes he would get jealous, accusing her of seeing other guys. Dixie knew he had a new life, one that was pulling him away from the simple, familiar world they once shared. Elvis's rise to fame was rapid, and the world of show business was seductive. He was part of package tours organized by Bob Neal and Jamboree Attractions, managed by the enigmatic Tom Parker. These tours took him to larger venues, where he shared the stage with established country stars like Hank Snow and Farron Young. Elvis's performances were a hit, and he learned from the seasoned professionals around him. His act was evolving, and he was becoming more confident and polished. Tom Parker, with his shrewd business sense and vision, saw the potential in Elvis. He had managed the country star Eddie Arnold, and had a knack for pushing artists to the national stage. Parker recognized that Elvis had a unique appeal, one that could transcend regional tastes and capture the hearts of a broader audience. He was determined to make Elvis a household name, and he was just the man to do it. For now, Elvis was on the cusp of something bigger, something that could change his life forever. The fans were already wild, the tours were gaining momentum, and the future looked bright. But the road ahead was uncertain, and the challenges were just beginning. By the end of that hot summer, Bob Neal was getting calls from big record companies. They had heard Elvis's music and seen him perform, and they thought he could be a big star. But Sam Phillips, who owned Sun Records, wasn't interested in selling Elvis's contract. Sun was doing well, and lots of young musicians were coming to the studio because of Elvis. Still, Bob knew that Sun had limits. They couldn't promote Elvis as much as the big labels could, especially in places like New York and Boston. Colonel Tom Parker, who had met Elvis earlier, kept pointing out these problems. He told Bob that Elvis needed a bigger platform to reach more people. Bob started to agree, but Sam didn't like Parker and didn't want to sell. However, as more big labels showed interest, Sam's resistance weakened. He realized he could make a lot of money from a deal. Bob and Parker worked out a plan where Bob would stay as Elvis's manager, but Parker would handle the big decisions and book shows. Bob thought this would keep him in the picture, but it actually gave Parker more control. Bob didn't realize this until later, but for now, he encouraged Elvis to trust Parker. Elvis was hesitant at first. He loved Son and Sam Phillips, who had believed in him from the start. But Bob laid out the facts, and Elvis couldn't ignore them. Parker also talked to Elvis's dad, Vernon, who got excited about the idea. Vernon's enthusiasm helped convince Elvis, even though Gladys, Elvis's mom, was still against it. She didn't trust Parker and was worried about what might happen to Elvis if he became too famous. To reassure the family, Parker sent a famous country singer, Hank Snow, to talk to them. This helped, but Gladys never fully trusted Parker. On November 21st, 1955, RCA Records, a big label, bought Elvis's contract from Sun for $35,000. It was a huge amount of money, and RCA also got all the recordings Elvis had made with Sun. Elvis got a $5,000 bonus and 5% of the profits from his records. He had to record 8 songs a year. Some people at RCA were nervous. They wondered if Elvis, a Southern singer with a new sound, would be popular outside the South. They worried he might be a fad. But Parker was confident and had convinced them to take the risk. Sam Phillips was conflicted. The money would help him pay off debts and sign more artists, like Carl Perkins, Johnny Cash, and Jerry Lee Lewis. But he was sad to see Elvis go. Sam had nurtured Elvis's unique talent and was unsure if Parker would treat it the same way. Elvis's mom, Gladys, became the symbol of those who believed Elvis's talent would be lost in the mainstream. She was the only one who held out against the deal, fearing what fame might do to her son. Elvis, however, had bigger dreams. He wanted to be a movie star and reach a wider audience. Bob Neal knew this and believed Parker was the right person to help Elvis achieve those dreams. Parker wasted no time. He started making calls and planning Elvis's next moves. He arranged for Elvis to appear on the Dorsey Brothers TV show, which would give him national exposure. Parker also met with RCA officials to discuss marketing and promotion. Elvis impressed everyone with his understanding of the business and his determination. But not everyone at RCA was convinced. Steve Scholes, who was in charge of Elvis's recordings, was still unsure. He worried that Elvis might not be the right choice, especially after Carl Perkins's Blue Suede Shoes became a hit. The music industry was changing, and the old formulas weren't working as well. Songs like Rock Around the Clock by Bill Haley and the Comets, which had a strong R&B influence, were becoming popular with teenagers. Despite the doubts, Parker and RCA were committed. They believed in Elvis's potential, and he was ready to take the next step in his career. The stage was set for Elvis to become a national sensation. By 1955, the music scene was changing. Rhythm and blues, once a niche genre, was catching on with white audiences. Artists like Fats Domino and Chuck Berry were making waves. Domino's Ain't That a Shame was a huge hit, and Berry's Maybelline climbed to No. 5 on the pop charts. Little Richard, with his wild and energetic style, burst onto the scene with Tutti Frutti, which reached No. 17 on the pop charts. The Platters, with their smooth doo-wop sound, had a massive hit with The Great Pretender, topping both the pop and R&B charts. Disc jockeys like Alan Freed in Cleveland played a crucial role. Freed called this new blend of music rock and roll, and the name stuck. Despite the skepticism of some music industry veterans, the new sound was clearly here to stay. In January 1956, Elvis Presley signed with RCA and recorded his first session in Nashville. The session included DJ Fontana on drums, who added a solid rhythmic foundation to Elvis's music. They recorded Heartbreak Hotel, a haunting and unique song that would soon become a hit. However, RCA wasn't entirely satisfied with the sound, so they arranged another session in New York to capture more material for Elvis's first album. Elvis made his television debut on The Stage Show on January 28th. His performance was electric, but the audience was initially shocked by his wild movements. Despite the mixed reaction, Elvis's confidence grew, and his performances on the show improved. By the time Heartbreak Hotel was released, it was getting airplay across the country and climbing the charts. It reached No. 1 by mid-April, much to the relief of RCA and his manager, Colonel Tom Parker. Elvis's first RCA album was released in late March, and quickly rose to No. 1. His popularity soared, and he appeared on more television shows. With each appearance, the buzz around him intensified, drawing new fans to his records and concerts. Parker scheduled Elvis's tours strategically between his TV appearances, ensuring that his momentum continued to build. Elvis was a media darling, appearing in interviews and projecting a wholesome image offstage. This contrasted sharply with his wild performances, and it helped endear him to the public. By May, Heartbreak Hotel had topped the pop and country charts, and his next single, I Want You, I Need You, I Love You, was also a hit. RCA was convinced they had signed America's newest singing sensation. Elvis's success brought financial stability to his family. They moved from a modest rental to a larger home in a better neighborhood, and then to a luxurious 5-bedroom ranch house on Audubon Drive. Elvis bought his parents new cars, and indulged himself with clothes and records. His parents, Vernon and Gladys, were overjoyed, and Gladys continued to document his achievements in scrapbooks. Despite his new home, Elvis spent less time there as his career took off. He performed at large venues across the South and Mid-Atlantic, drawing huge hysterical crowds. The noise was often so loud that the musicians couldn't hear themselves play. Parker micromanaged every aspect of the tours, from the opening acts to the color of the posters. He kept the band's salaries low, but made it clear that their relationship with Elvis was why they were still with him. Parker's efforts to get Elvis into Hollywood paid off when the film producer Hal Wallis saw him on The Dorsey Show and invited him to Los Angeles for a screen test. Wallis was impressed by Elvis's charisma and stage presence, and the screen test confirmed that Elvis had the potential to be a movie star. Elvis, eager to please, agreed to play dramatic roles, but Wallis was more interested in leveraging his popularity with teenagers. After intense negotiations, Elvis signed a contract with Wallis and Paramount. The deal included a one-picture contract with options for up to 6 more films, with increasingly higher payments. Parker's strategic move ensured that major studios would compete for Elvis's services, setting the stage for a lucrative film career. Even more far-sighted was Parker's decision to book Elvis for a 2-week engagement at the New Frontier Hotel in Las Vegas starting at the end of April. Parker knew it was a gamble, but he was eager to see how Elvis would do with an older, wealthier crowd. Elvis and his band were nervous, especially at the first few shows. To help loosen up the audience, Elvis added self-deprecating humor between songs. But the engagement didn't go well. Most people were more interested in gambling, and those who did listen were shocked by the noise coming from the stage. Despite the rough start, Elvis loved Las Vegas. During the day, he and his cousin Gene, who came along as a roadie, hung around the pool, flirted with waitresses and showgirls, and met other performers like Johnny Ray and Liberace. Elvis also saw a lot of shows and discovered a song he thought might work for his act, Hound Dog, a cover of Big Mama Thornton's R&B hit by Freddie Bell and the Bellboys. Las Vegas was the perfect playground for Elvis, with entertainment around every corner. He told a reporter, "Man, I really like Vegas. I'm going back there the first chance I get." And he did. It became one of his favorite spots. Parker, capitalizing on Elvis's growing fame, arranged for him to appear on Milton Berle's variety show, which was super popular. Elvis's first appearance, for which he earned $3,000, coincided with his screen test in Hollywood. The show, broadcast from an aircraft carrier in San Diego, increased Elvis's national fame and showed how much more confident he had become as a performer. He played Heartbreak Hotel and Blue Suede Shoes, and even did a comedy sketch with Berle. For his second appearance on June 5th, the show was back in Burbank, California. Elvis performed his latest single, I Want You, I Need You, I Love You, and a high-energy version of Hound Dog, complete with suggestive moves. The show was a hit, and it won its time slot for the first time that season, but the criticism started pouring in. Television critics were harsh, saying his movements were more suitable for dives and bordellos. His singing was called vulgar and unintelligible. The New York Times even said Elvis had no discernible singing ability. Critics were also worried about the wild reactions from teenage audiences. The attacks continued, with politicians, clergymen, and newspaper columnists joining in. Frank Sinatra, a former teen idol himself, called rock and roll phony and false, and its musicians cretinous goons. He said the music inspired every sideburns delinquent on the face of the earth. By today's standards, the criticism seems overblown, but it revealed deeper anxieties about rock and roll. Critics not only dismissed the music's quality, but also linked it to lower social classes and the problem of juvenile delinquency. Rock and roll was seen as a threat to the middle-brow culture that many adults valued. Sinatra was drawing a line, suggesting that the new music was inferior and aimed at the lowest common denominator. But it wasn't just about the music's quality. Many critics were concerned about the influence rock and roll and its stars had on teenagers. Juvenile delinquency, though not more widespread than before, became a big issue. It was a symbol of adults' fears about the growing youth culture. For most of American history, teenagers had identified with their families and communities. But by the late 1940s, a new, more inclusive youth culture was emerging. This was partly due to the rise of comprehensive high schools, where students from different backgrounds mixed more. The post-war economic boom also played a role. Teenagers had more money and more job opportunities, which made them a target for businesses. They started buying products and identifying with each other more than with their parents. The new youth culture celebrated pleasure and instant gratification, which often put teenagers at odds with their parents. Middle-class parents were especially worried. The youth culture encouraged mixing across class, ethnicity, and race, and its style was influenced by working-class teens. This was seen as a threat to the ideal of family togetherness and moral order. The Cold War added to these fears. There was a worry that a nation too focused on affluence might not be strong enough to face the Soviet threat. With so much hope invested in middle-class youth, the idea that they were being corrupted by a carefree, self-indulgent culture was alarming. Rock and roll, with its biracial appeal and irreverent energy, became a major concern. When it started attracting a larger, more diverse white teen audience, the criticism intensified. Record labels tried to tone down the music by producing sanitized covers and encouraging black artists to sweeten their sound. But this didn't stop the demand for the original versions, thanks to disc jockeys like Alan Freed. These efforts also made the music even more popular among white listeners, leading to more black artists on the pop charts. By 1956, rock and roll was dominating the music market, and musicians were creating new hybrids that combined R&B, doo-wop, country, swing, and pop. By 1957, artists like Chuck Berry, Fats Domino, Buddy Holly, and the Drifters were performing in mixed-race shows, and rock and roll was here to stay. The rise of rock and roll in the 1950s was more than just a change in music. It was a cultural revolution. For many middle-class Americans, the emergence of this new genre, especially through crossover hits like rock and roll, was deeply unsettling. The influence of African American culture, particularly the urban black working class, was at the heart of this new youth movement. This group, often seen by the middle class as a symbol of disorder and rebellion, was the last group they wanted their children to emulate. The black working class, unlike the middle-class African Americans who promoted self-help and respectability, sometimes rejected the values of self-control and self-improvement. In urban areas, they created a vibrant subculture that celebrated nightlife, music, and personal freedom. This subculture gave birth to rhythm and blues, which later evolved into rock and roll. Even though the rock and roll of the 1950s was often watered down, it still carried echoes of this subculture, and many adults found it alarming. The fears were not just about race, but also about the changing sexual norms. Since the 1920s, American culture had become more open about sexuality, especially after World War II. The Kinsey Reports, published in 1948 and 1953, revealed that many Americans were engaging in behaviors that went against traditional sexual value. The post-war era of prosperity and consumerism only intensified these changes. leading to more liberal attitudes towards sex and leisure. However, this shift did not sit well with everyone. Religious conservatives and other traditionalists organized boycotts and pressure groups to fight what they saw as the moral decline of America. Elvis Presley, a poor, uneducated Southern boy, became the face of these changes. His music, heavily influenced by African American styles, and his energetic, sexual performance style made him a sensation among young people, but a nightmare for their parents. Elvis wasn't just a singer. He was a symbol of the new youth culture. His lack of interest in traditional middle-class values, such as education and cultural refinement, only added to the concerns of his critics. They saw him as a threat to the social order, someone who could corrupt the morals of the youth. Elvis's Southern roots also played a role in the controversy. The South, often viewed by Northerners as culturally backward, was a source of embarrassment for many middle-class Southerners. Elvis's accent and mannerisms were mocked, and he was often depicted in a negative light in the media. His popularity among black audiences, demonstrated by his success on the R&B charts, only heightened the racial tensions. His flashy style and ambiguous racial identity further stoked fears of race mixing. Despite the criticism, Elvis remained true to himself. He didn't see his music or performances as rebellious. He was just being authentic. He defended his fans, who were often dismissed as hysterical and undisciplined, insisting that they were just enjoying themselves. His parents, who initially had mild objections to his music, were proud of his success and shared his shock at the negative press. The controversy surrounding Elvis, however, had an unexpected effect. It made him even more popular. The more he was attacked, the more teenagers rallied around him. Being an Elvis fan became a way to assert independence from parental authority. The media attention, managed by his shrewd manager, Colonel Parker, only amplified his star power. By the summer of 1956, Elvis was a national sensation, and his records were selling in record numbers. When Ed Sullivan, who had previously vowed never to have Elvis on his show, changed his mind, it was a significant moment. Elvis's appearance on the Steve Allen Show, where he was forced to tone down his performance, showed the tension between his natural style and the expectations of the mainstream. But his next single, Hound Dog and Don't Be Cruel, became an instant hit, solidifying his status as the king of rock and roll. The story of Elvis Presley in the mid-1950s is a tale of cultural upheaval, racial tensions, and the power of youth culture. His rise to fame was not just about music. It was about challenging the status quo and redefining what it meant to be a star in America. Elvis's first appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show was on September 9th. The actor Charles Laughton stepped in for Sullivan and introduced Elvis. Elvis took the stage and performed Don't Be Cruel, Hound Dog, Little Richard's Ready Teddy, and Love Me Tender. At first he was a bit shy, but as the set went on, he became more relaxed and confident. When Elvis started rocking out during Ready Teddy, the camera didn't show his now famous leg movements, but the audience in the studio went wild, screaming and cheering. The show was a huge hit, with over 80% of the viewing public watching, and it became one of the most talked about moments in TV history. Elvis's next appearance on the show was on October 28th, right before the release of his first movie. He sang Love Me Tender again, promoting the film, and his performance was full of energy and charm. He was more confident and had a great time on stage, which made the audience love him even more. The third appearance in early January was the best one yet. Elvis wore a gold lame vest and performed a mix of songs, from Don't Be Cruel and Too Much to the gospel song Peace in the Valley. CBS tried to avoid controversy by only filming him from the waist up during his up-tempo songs. At the end of the show, Ed Sullivan praised Elvis, calling him a real decent, fine boy, and saying they had a great time with him. This helped Elvis win over the show business establishment, who had been skeptical of him. The high ratings from the Sullivan shows gave Elvis's manager, Colonel Parker, more leverage. Elvis had earned $50,000 for his 3 appearances, but Parker told the networks that it would cost $300,000 for Elvis to appear again, and they would have to do a full-hour special. The networks didn't agree, and Parker was fine with that because he wanted to focus on Elvis's movie career. Parker believed that too many TV appearances could make Elvis less popular. Parker also made smart business moves by selling Elvis Presley merchandise. In July 1956, he signed a deal with Hank Saperstein to sell items like charm bracelets, lockets, and record players. These products were a huge success and brought in a lot of money. Parker used the merchandise to connect with Elvis fan clubs, which were mostly run by teenage girls. He provided them with official Elvis products and used the clubs to promote Elvis's music and movies. Elvis's relationship with rock and roll was more practical than passionate. He enjoyed it, but he also worried it was a passing trend. He often said he liked singing ballads in the style of Eddie Fisher and Perry Como. When he first auditioned for Sam Phillips, he only sang ballads, and it was by chance that he showed his love for rhythm and blues. Phillips encouraged him to focus on rock and roll, which led to hits like Don't Be Cruel. When Elvis started making movies, his musical style changed. His first movie, Love Me Tender, was a Civil War drama, so the music was more folk-inspired. But his next few movies had contemporary settings and allowed him to rock out. He also sang ballads and pop novelty songs, which became a part of his film soundtracks. By the end of the 1950s, Elvis was more than just a rock and roller. He could sing rock and roll, R&B, country ballads, and pop songs. He even recorded a Christmas album and some gospel songs. His music had a unique sound, thanks to his precise arrangements and the high production values at RCA. His records continued to sell well, with hits like All Shook Up and Jailhouse Rock reaching No. 1 on the charts. Elvis's music had an edge that few other artists could match. He could perform up-tempo rockers with intense energy, like Jailhouse Rock, and still deliver smooth pop rock hits like All Shook Up. His covers of R&B songs, like One Night, showed his deep understanding of the genre. Despite the polished sound of his RCA records, Elvis's voice and the backing band provided a powerful and dynamic performance. Elvis's musical talent was evident to those who worked with him. He could play guitar, piano, and even bass, and he often took charge during recording sessions. Songwriters like Jerry Leiber and Mike Stoller, who initially didn't like Elvis, changed their minds after working with him. They saw that he had a deep knowledge of R&B and gospel, and a natural talent for music. Colonel Parker's management style also played a big role in Elvis's success. Parker let Elvis handle the musical side of things, allowing him to choose his own songs and record them his way. This trust helped Elvis develop his unique sound and style. Parker's strategic use of television and merchandise helped Elvis reach a nationwide audience and become a cultural icon. Elvis's success on television and in music opened the door to Hollywood. When he got the chance to try out for a movie, he made the most of it. Despite having no acting experience, he convinced industry executives to invest in him. But what kind of movie star would he be? And could he maintain his success in both music and films? Elvis Presley's first big break from the constant grind of touring, television appearances, and recording sessions came in July 1956. He, along with his cousins Gene and Junior Smith, and friends Red West and Arthur Hooten, decided to drive from Memphis to Biloxi, Mississippi, to visit a young woman Elvis had been seeing. This break was supposed to be a peaceful retreat, a chance for Elvis to relax and enjoy some downtime, but things didn't go as planned. Within hours of their arrival, word spread that Elvis Presley was in town. A large crowd gathered in the courtyard of his hotel, and his white Cadillac convertible was covered with notes, addresses, and phone numbers, some written in lipstick and others scratched into the car's paint. This incident was a clear sign of the intense fame and adulation that Elvis would face as his national stardom grew. Elvis's newfound celebrity brought both joy and challenges. He loved the attention and the fans who adored him, and he often went out of his way to chat with them, sign autographs, and return their affection. He even invited fans to his home on Audubon Drive, where they would gather and socialize. Elvis was grateful for his fans, and he couldn't understand why some stars resented their fans' attention. To him, pleasing his fans was his top priority, and he viewed himself as an entertainer, not an artist. However, fame also meant that Elvis's personal life became more complicated. He was often surrounded by young women, and while he had a steady girlfriend, he also enjoyed the company of many others. His friends, like George Klein, would help him find women at his concerts, and Elvis was careful to avoid any trouble. He was interested in intimacy and companionship, and he brought some of these women home to meet his parents, a sign that he considered them more than just casual dates. One of Elvis's most serious relationships was with June Juanico, a young woman from Biloxi. They met in the summer of 1955 and reconnected a year later when June and her friends visited Memphis. Elvis showed her around the city, introducing her to the places that were important to him. They became very close, and rumors of their engagement spread. However, Elvis's manager, Colonel Parker, was furious when Elvis and June gave interviews without his approval. Parker made it clear that any serious relationship could harm Elvis's career, especially with his teenage female fans. Elvis eventually drifted away from June, but the experience showed how his personal life could be affected by his fame. As Elvis's popularity grew, so did the perks of being a celebrity. Merchants would open after hours to cater to him, and he was treated like a hero in Memphis. He was invited to charity events and public gatherings, where he was met with cheers and excitement. However, the attention also brought problems. Crowds at his performances became more hysterical, and he required police escorts to leave venues. Even in Memphis, he couldn't go to the movies or eat at restaurants without causing a scene. In October 1956, Elvis was slapped by a gas station manager during a mob scene, and he ended up in a fight that resulted in charges of assault and battery. Elvis complained to reporters, "It's getting where I can't even leave the house without something happening to me." Elvis also had to be on guard against jealous boyfriends and young men who wanted to punch him. He started traveling with Red West, a former football player who served as his bodyguard. By the end of 1956, the crowds at his home on Audubon Drive had become too much. Neighbors complained, and the situation became intolerable. The Presleys decided to look for a new home that would give them more privacy. They found Graceland, a beautiful 14-acre estate in rural Whitehaven, about 8 miles south of downtown Memphis. The house was perfect, and Elvis was thrilled. He hired an interior decorator to redesign the interior, and he had big plans to make it even more luxurious. Elvis installed a soda fountain and a jukebox in the basement, and Gladys had a modern kitchen with all the latest appliances. Outside, they built a chicken house and a vegetable garden, but they also added a sunken patio, a swimming pool, and front gates with musical notes. Graceland became a symbol of Elvis's success and his desire to create a home that reflected his tastes and aspirations. It was a mix of classical elegance and modern opulence, a place where Elvis could enjoy the comforts of his fame while still holding on to some of the simple pleasures of his southern roots. For Elvis, building a home exactly to his liking was what success was all about. Elvis and his family found themselves at Graceland, the place that would become their sanctuary. The estate's walls and gates, guarded by relatives like Vernon's brother Vester, kept fans and curious onlookers at bay, giving the Presleys a much-needed sense of privacy. Gladys tended her vegetable garden and chickens, while Vernon managed the family's finances. Relatives often visited for extended stays, and when Elvis was home, he spent most of his time with his friends, like George Klein, Red West, and Anita Wood, whom he started dating in the summer of 1957. But there were also new friends, like Cliff Gleaves, Lamar Fike, and Alan Fortas, who were just as eager to be part of Elvis's inner circle as he was to have constant companionship. Despite the constant flow of friends, Graceland remained a family-oriented home. The Presleys would watch TV or sing spirituals around the baby grand piano Elvis had installed. Alan Fortas noted, "It never got wild at Graceland, thanks largely to Gladys, whose presence kept Elvis grounded." However, Gladys's role was crucial because other forces were pulling Elvis away. His career demanded a lot of his time. Recording, touring, and making movies in Hollywood kept him busy, and he spent little time at Graceland during the first year they lived there. When he was around, he found it hard to adjust to a normal schedule, staying up all night and sleeping in the morning. This nocturnal lifestyle was reinforced when he faced problems in public. Instead of dealing with the chaos, he would go out late at night, and businesses were happy to accommodate his unusual hours. A phone call would get a store to open for a late night, shopping spree, or arrange an after-hours movie screening for Elvis and his friends. By the summer of 1957, an inner circle of friends had formed, including George Klein, Red West, Cliff Gleaves, Lamar Fike, Alan Fortas, and Elvis's cousins Gene and Junior Smith. They visited almost nightly when Elvis was home, and as he became more famous, he wanted them around all the time, even on tour or during movie shoots. Their presence was comforting, especially in Hollywood where his insecurities were heightened. While they respected Gladys and Vernon, Elvis's friends encouraged his playful side and an exaggerated macho attitude. This behavior often made him rude or possessive toward his girlfriends, a stark contrast to the thoughtful and sensitive side he showed when alone with them. The dynamics of this group sometimes turned his true friends into sycophants. They were so eager to stay in his good graces that they rarely challenged him. Those who did quickly found themselves on the outside. Gladys noticed the changes in Elvis. She worried about how pale and overworked he looked, how hyper and nervous he seemed. She spent most of her time in the kitchen, often staring out the window, deep in thought. Friends recalled that she began drinking heavily, and some believed her son's success contributed to her slide into alcoholism and depression. Lamar Fike said, "She was very proud of Elvis, but his stardom scared her. It drove her over the edge and hastened her death. Even Elvis had moments of doubt." Hounded by the press, prevented from going out in public, and pulled away from home by his career, he found the pressure overwhelming. At Easter services in April 1957, he told the minister, "I have got more money than I can spend. I have thousands of fans out there, and I have lots of people who call themselves my friends, but I am miserable." Despite this, he felt responsible for providing for his family and friends, a burden that sometimes felt heavy. The tours continued, with Elvis playing big cities in the Northeast, Midwest, and Canada. He even traveled to the Pacific Northwest and Hawaii, where Colonel Parker had connections. Parker received offers for a European tour, but he turned them down, claiming the terms were not good enough. However, Parker's real fear was that his illegal immigrant status would be discovered if they traveled abroad. Controversy followed Elvis. Fans rioted at some concerts, and civic officials worried about his performances. In Vancouver, thousands of fans surrounded the stage, and Parker had to stop the concert for Elvis's safety. The Catholic Church was also hostile, with priests telling parishioners to boycott his music. Some teenagers, jealous of his success, threw eggs at him during concerts. In late October, Elvis played at the Pan Pacific Auditorium in Los Angeles, where a large crowd, including Hollywood celebrities, attended. After a wild performance, he faced harsh criticism from the press and some of the audience. The Los Angeles Vice Squad warned Parker that Elvis would have to tone down his act, and at the next show, he was more restrained. This experience, combined with the constant tension and criticism, convinced Parker that tours were more trouble than they were worth. He stopped booking live appearances, focusing instead on Elvis's film career. Elvis's first movie, Love Me Tender, was a success, earning over $500,000 in its first week. He loved Hollywood and impressed many with his seriousness and courtesy. He became friends with young actors like Nick Adams, Dennis Hopper, and Natalie Wood. When he made his first starring role in Loving You for Paramount, his performance showed marked improvement. Vernon and Gladys even visited the set and appeared in the audience during a musical scene. Graceland remained a place of comfort and family, but the pressures of fame and the dynamics of his inner circle began to affect Elvis and his mother. Despite the challenges, Graceland was always a place where Elvis could find a sense of normalcy and connection to his roots.